Today we're talking about the converse of an if-then statement. So all that means is it's the opposite of the original if-then statement. So it switches the hypothesis and the conclusion. So for example, the purpose of playing the card game the other day was just to get some practice with if and then statements and getting used to them. So here's a conditional statement like you saw in the card game. So if you draw a 9, then draw 3 bonus cards. So you could flip that, which is what converse means, and say if you draw 3 bonus cards, then you drew a 9. So you might have to reword it a little bit to make sure it makes sense, but really all you're doing is just flipping the hypothesis and the conclusion. So we're going to practice doing that first. So it says write the converse of the following conditional. So what might be a little bit hard about this chapter is you have to remember what all of these words are. So it might help you just to make a note by converse that says flip. That way you can try to remember that that's what converse is. So if you draw a 4, then discard 2 cards. So when you flip the hypothesis and the conclusion, it will say if you discard or discarded 2 cards, then you drew a 4. And that is all for number 1. Number 2, if 2 lines intersect to form right angles, then they are perpendicular. So don't use they here because we don't know what they are yet. So if 2 lines, so make sure you've got a subject in the beginning. If 2 lines are perpendicular, then now you can say they intersect to form right angles. Okay, number 3, if 2 lines are not parallel and do not intersect, then they are skew. So if, we're flipping the order, if 2 lines are skew, then they are not parallel and do not intersect. Okay, so if you could pause the video now and try this on your own, and then push play in about a minute to check to see if you got it right. So number 4, the converse should be if segment AM is congruent to segment MB, then M is the midpoint of segment AB. Okay, example 2. So now we're going to talk about the symbolic notation. So like yesterday we went over that P is the hypothesis and Q is the conclusion. So now instead of writing if P then Q like we did yesterday, we're going to be writing if Q then P. So we're writing the converse of the original statement. So number 1 tells us that P, so the hypothesis is a number is odd, and the conclusion is it's not divisible by 2. So if Q is it's not divisible by 2. So if a number, so we're going to reword it a little bit to make it make sense, is not divisible by 2, then now you can say it is odd. Number 2, so again we're writing if Q then P. So we don't want to use they, so 2 angles. So if 2 angles are complementary, then they have a sum of 90. So pause here and see if you can do number 3 on your own. Okay, you should have gotten if it is fall, then it's September 28th. So hopefully you notice that that is not a true statement because that's what we're going to talk about next. So it is possible for a statement to be true going one way, and then when you flip it, it could then be false. And we talked a little bit about that yesterday, but here's an example. So if the conditional, the if-then statement said, if it is a dog, then it is a mammal, that is true. A dog is a mammal. But if you flip that and say, if it is a mammal, then it's a dog, that's no longer true. So if that happens when you flip it and it's not true, then it wants a counterexample. So this is what proves that that statement is false. So you could say cat or anything else that's a mammal but not a dog. So let's try some of those. It says, write the converse of each conditional statement, then determine the truth value. So we're going to say true or false. If it's false, provide a counterexample. So if it's true, then you just put true and you're done. So number 1, first write the converse. So we're flipping it. If you are in Missouri, then you are in Monette. So this is false. And then we have to give a counterexample. So any city that's in Missouri, that is not Monette, whatever you want to put. I'll put St. Louis. Okay, number 2. If a point is in the first quadrant, so let me remind you what that means. So this is the X and the Y. So first quadrant is here. This is 1, this is 2, 3, 4. So if a point is in the first quadrant, which is over here, then its coordinates are positive. So that means all these points, X and the Y, they're all positive. So let's flip that and see if it's true. So if, don't put it, if a point, if a point's coordinates are positive, then it's in the first quadrant. So is that still true once we flipped it? So if a point's coordinates are positive, that would mean positive X, positive Y. It has to be right here. There's no other way that that could land in 2, 3, or 4. So this one is true, both directions. Number 3, if it is raining, then there is precipitation. So we're going to flip it first. If there is precipitation, then it is raining. So precipitation, I don't know like the actual scientific term, but basically it's moisture coming from the sky. So this would be false because there's other types of precipitation besides rain. So you could put snow, hail would work, ice would work, anything like that. So now pause and try number 4 on your own. So first you should have written the converse. If two angles are congruent, then they have a measure of 90. So that is false. They could be any other angle and be congruent as long as they were the same thing. So any angle measure here would work. So now you'll have homework to work on for the rest of the time. If you get finished with today's, make sure you finish yesterday's And if you have both of them finished, then just spend your time doing something else quietly, either reading or working on other homework. I will see you tomorrow.